Good afternoon and welcome to Howard University. I'd like to begin by introducing the Provost and Chief Academic Officer at Howard University, Dr. Anthony Wutaw, who will bring welcoming remarks.
Good afternoon. And welcome to Howard University. I'm Anthony Wutaw, as introduced by Dean Fenwick, the Provost and Chief Academic Officer at Howard University. And on behalf of our President, Dr. Wayne Frederick, who unfortunately could not join us this afternoon, I want to welcome each of you to Howard University, particularly our students who are here with us this afternoon. I'm particularly honored and pleased to welcome our distinguished panelists, starting with Dr. John B. King, the Acting Secretary of Education in the Department of Education, Randy Weingarten, President of the American Federation of Teachers, Elisa Villanueva Beard, the CEO of Teach for America, Harry Preston, a teacher in Baltimore Teacher Leaders Program, and obviously Dean Fenwick. And I want to particularly thank Dean Fenwick for her leadership and her organization of this event. I want to just make sure we acknowledge her before we go on. This is a particularly critical topic, not just for Howard University, but for our country. I received some statistics from a recent report from the Albert Shanker Institute, noting, for example, that between 2002 and 2012, the number of African American teachers dropped significantly in 9 of America's largest cities. Also, Latino children are almost 1 in 4 students in our country's public elementary and secondary schools, yet Hispanics represent only 8% of the teacher workforce. Additionally, less than 2% of teachers identify as Asian American Pacific Islander, and research clearly shows the impact of teacher diversity on student outcomes. According to the Department of Education, by the year 2022, nearly 55% of public school students will be minority. Are we taking the appropriate and the correct steps to prepare for that eventuality? And are we preparing our teachers in a way that will enable them to engage with the changing dynamic of students in America? So I look forward to hearing this discussion. I want to welcome our distinguished panelists, and I want to thank each of you for being here. You could have been anywhere else. It's almost 80 degrees outside, but I thank you for your attention and your participation in this conversation also.
Well, the School of Education is very proud to join the U.S. Department of Education, the American Federation of Teachers, Teach for America, and the Albert Shanker Institute in co-sponsoring this conversation on teacher diversity. In my role as moderator, I will introduce our panelists, provide 4-minute framing remarks, and then direct questions to the panelists. And due to our limited time together and the Secretary's travel schedule, each panelist will have about 2 minutes to do introductory remarks and then 5 minutes to respond to 2 sets of questions. So join me again in welcoming our panelists, whose bios you can read in your program booklet. So we gathered today to discuss this yawning demographic mismatch between the nation's public school student population and the school personnel who serve them. For the first time in the history of American public education, students of color and students living in poverty are the majority. And yet approximately 91% of urban school teachers are white, and 73% of inner city teachers are white. In nearly 40% of American schools, there is not a single teacher of color on staff. And there's a history to this lack of diversity in the teacher workforce. The history is rarely discussed and rarely linked to the current state of affairs that we're experiencing, but it is responsible for what we're seeing, particularly with black teachers. As schools were being integrated in the late 60s and early 70s, white resistance to the Brown legal decision resulted in thousands of highly credentialed and effective black teachers and principals being dismissed, demoted, fired, and replaced by lesser credentialed white teachers. Prior to Brown, about 35 to 50% of the educator workforce was black in the states operating dual systems. Today, the percentage is about 8. So according to a series of U.S. Senate hearings about the displacement of black teachers and principals, there was a decided intention to eliminate black teacher and principal leadership in order to ensure that integrated schools and classrooms would be led by white teachers and principals. This notion of white intellectual and administrative leadership in classrooms and schools even affected Indian Bureau schools and Japanese internment camps, each of which had few Japanese or Native American teachers. Well, integration is a goal that all Americans say they support. And today, most also say they support the conclusion of the Carnegie Commission on Education and the Economy, that the nation can ill afford a future in which its children see exclusively white authority figures in their schools and classrooms. Further, as Provost Wutaw mentioned, researchers don't advocate race matching of students and teachers, but we do have decades of studies to show that academic and social benefits accrue to African American and Hispanic Latino students when they are in high diversity staffed schools. And in these circumstances, 4 outcomes prevail. Those students are less likely to be misplaced in special ed, more likely to be placed in gifted education, and less likely to be suspended or expelled, and more likely to graduate high school in 4 years. So today, this august panel will examine our national intentions about diversifying the teaching and school leadership workforces and discuss our unified way forward. Many of you know that those of us assembled here today are rarely in the room together, and so this is a remarkable occasion and certainly appropriate for Howard University. We'll now hear opening remarks from each of our panelists. We will begin with Acting Secretary of Education, Dr. John King.
Thanks so much, and thank you all for being here. Appreciate Howard hosting this event. Grateful for the leadership of the Provost and Dean, and certainly appreciate the hard work of my colleagues on the panel on this set of issues. Without question, when you have a majority of the students in our public schools who are students of color, but only 18% of our teachers are teachers of color and only 2% of our teachers are African American men, we have an urgent need to act. And the question for the country is, how do we address this quickly and thoughtfully? We've got to understand that not only do students of color benefit from having diverse teachers, but all students benefit from teacher diversity. Yes, we know there is strong evidence that students of color benefit from seeing themselves in the teacher workforce, benefit from the role models that provides, and benefit from the classroom dynamics that creates. But it's also important for our white students to see teachers of color in leadership roles in their classrooms and communities. And so it's critically important for all Americans that we tackle this issue of diversity in our teacher workforce. As we do that, we've got to think about it as a recruitment and preparation problem, but we've also got to think about it as a retention problem. On the recruitment and preparation side, we've got to be committed to attracting a more diverse educator workforce and a more diverse education leadership workforce. Our preparation institutions have to be intentional, and our preparation programs have to be intentional about who they attract, and ensuring that their student populations, or their, in the case of Teach for America, their core member populations, reflect our nation's diversity. They've also got to make sure that a diverse population of teachers are well prepared to succeed in the classroom, have the skills that they need to work with a diverse student population. But then we've got to look at the question of retention, and we have to worry, and the AFT has done some very important research on this, we have to worry that in many places we are losing teachers of color from the classroom. Some of that is driven by working conditions and issues of salary and the conditions under which people are asked to work. Some of that is driven by the tax, in essence, that is paid by being the voice of diversity on the faculty, the person folks always come to with their questions about issues of diversity. Or we often see for some of our African American male educators, the assumption that, well, he's good with the boys, so let's make sure that he works with all the challenging boys. And that creates, again, a tax that then causes folks to get tired and results in some of the retention challenge that we are seeing across the country. So we've got to be intentional as a country about the preparation side, the retention side, and we've got to make sure that we make this conversation not just an opportunity to admire the problem, but an opportunity for everyone on the panel and everyone in the room to begin to make a difference. Thanks.
Thank you, Secretary King. Ms. Weingart?
So I'm going to say ditto, 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 ditto. And then I'll use my 2 minutes to say something else. So, you know, both the dean and the acting secretary have talked about and has sized up the problem, and I'm very proud of us and the Shanker Institute for putting this out and for, you know, in the fall, because there were many of us, and acting, and Mr. Secretary, can I say that yet? One of the things we're going to ask you to do as part of trying to solve the problem is that this is one of the few areas that you don't actually collect data on. And there are thousands of areas you do collect data on, and we think this is one of the areas you need to collect data on so that we don't have to actually try to figure out and into from national data what's really going on. So, but some of us, the reason why some of us decided to look deeply at this issue is because in meeting after meeting that I was having with new teachers, there seemed to be a whitening of the teacher force. And I saw that in New York, and I've seen that throughout the country. And so we said, something's wrong with this. And we didn't have the data that we could go to. And the dean started talking about the data from 60 years ago, as opposed to look at the data from New Orleans, where essentially 3,500 people were fired, mostly African-American teachers, and then you look at who's hired in their place in different kind of contours. Also, you look at the data from Washington, D.C., where we saw under the re-administration a firing of mostly African-American senior female teachers, and then who was hired instead. Now, one could say this was about, as she did, about quality or about austerity or about other things, but the fact remained, what we started seeing was not simply the national numbers, which are that we are teaching a majority. I'm sorry, can I do this? Can you hear me without this? Is that better? I'll use my cafeteria voice. So we saw a minority student population, but yet a growing white teaching population. And so we said we needed to shine the light on this. So, but I agree with John that the issue becomes, how do we solve this? And yes, it is a pipeline issue. There is a recruitment issue. There is an issue in terms of how we support teachers. But mostly, I want to focus on what Richard Ingersoll focused on, which is it's a working condition issue. And at the end of the day, we can't keep saying that we want the best teachers to go to the hardest to staff schools and then do nothing to actually help them and keep them. And so there are programs that we can do, including residency programs and things like that as part of the original pipeline, and I would support that. And they are expensive, but the residency programs we've seen in New York and in Boston really, really work. And if you want to talk about that during my other 4 minutes of time, we will. But working conditions. Think about what Professor Ingersoll said. The schools that we are focused on were schools that had very, very sanctioning environments in two respects. Testing, 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 because everything was about what the data is, because we want to make sure that the schools didn't close, or if they closed, what happened to them. And the second piece of sanctioning was the climate issues in terms of zero tolerance. So when you put that together, you then say, what teacher is going to want to go to a school which is all about testing and expulsions, as opposed to how do we support kids? How do we give them the conditions they need, the conditions that teachers need to teach? And that's what I think we have to focus on first and foremost. Yes, the pipeline is really important, but we need to keep the African American and the Latino teachers and the Native teachers who come to our schools. We need to nurture them, we need to keep them, we need to support them, and we need to lift them up.
Thank you.
Hi, it's so great to be here. Thank you to the Dean and Secretary and Randy and Harry here for having, I think, a very overdue conversation about this topic. This conversation is personal to me as a Mexican-American woman who grew up in the border of South Texas, and someone who has sort of lived this and understands the importance of this, and that's where my starting point comes from. So as the leader of Teach for America, who is recruiting young people to decide to be a part of a group and in partnership with many others to say where a child happens to be born should not dictate her life outcomes. And we're going to be part of the solution and work alongside many others against this. Because we work in rural and urban America, we work with children growing up in low-income communities, we work with mostly kids of color, this has always been an incredibly important topic for us, and we have committed a lot of resources and time to ensure that we are doing our part in responsibly doing the work that we do every day. I am proud to say that today, Teach for America's incoming core, 49% of our teachers are teachers of color, 21% are African American compared to the 7% across the country, and 14% of our teachers are Latino compared to 8% of the rest of the country. And for us, it just, the core issue here is when we're talking about educational equity, at the core of it is about race, class, and privilege, and we've got to just take it head on. And so we're a goal-oriented group of people, and when we decided that, this is incredibly important, it's one of our core values. We have a diversity statement that states our aspirations, and we have learned over time that actually anyone can be successful with our kids. It doesn't matter what skin color you have, all kids can succeed with our children. But we also have learned that the power of having a teacher of color brings a potential of an additional profound impact that's really important. Our children need to be able to see themselves in their teachers. They need to know that when they have a bunch of white teachers, they can inadvertently send the message that the holders of knowledge are white, and that is not good or healthy for our children. And so we have over-resourced, over-invested to ensure that we do this, and we believe that that's what it takes. It takes setting really clear goals, deciding you're going to do this, and then going after it and constantly reflecting to figure out what else you need to do. And I hope the conversation doesn't stop here, because representation is one part of this, and what I have learned over time is that then we need to talk about inclusiveness and what it means to actually create a context in which people can succeed and thrive and be empowered. And then we need to talk about cultural competence, because even when you're a person of color, you may not be a culturally competent teacher. And in order to educate our children and ensure they are getting an empowering education, we got to take all of these elements out. So hopefully the conversation goes just even beyond representation, which is step number one, and we're doing very poorly, so we've got to take it on. But it's multidimensional as we look at really fully ensuring we're doing all that we can for our kids.
Thank you.
Well, I guess I'll turn this one. Mike doesn't like me. Can anybody hear me? We good? Good afternoon, everybody. I'm extremely honored to be here, especially with this esteemed panel, which, as you can see by credentials, I'm the lower person on the totem pole.
Never.
Hey, I'll accept it. Again, as a teacher of color, I am African American, right? But very, very, very mixed. And so when we get into a classroom situation, we have these conversations. It's very interesting to see a lot of times that as the acting secretary alluded to earlier, you become the person, the go-to person for diversity issues, right? Well, our opinions and views aren't always necessarily the same. It is very important that we're also seeing lots of different faces, people from different regions, people from different countries, people from different backgrounds. It's who we are. It makes us, it enriches the educational experience that our students have. And going forward into the world, we want our students to have the richest possible educational experience. So as you can imagine, looking from the standpoint that I have an unusual trajectory into education, but I am now teaching engineering. And teachers like myself have a very difficult time staying in the classroom. As President Weingarten spoke of, the working conditions are very difficult to making sure, keeping teachers with my skill set in the classroom. I have a background in physics, business, math, and engineering. It's very difficult to keep us in the classroom, but who else better to teach our students those things, right? You kind of want people with diverse backgrounds because you want people with life experiences saying, hey, guys, yes, the book says this, but let's look at it this way. Let's look at it this way. And if you only have one teacher telling you that, one type of teacher telling you that, one person who came from one field, one area, and they came from the same set of schools that taught the same set of ways, you can't have that conversation, well, what about this or what about this? So again, making sure that we're finding people who have diverse backgrounds, who have diverse racially and diverse ideologically and diverse religiously and diverse educationally. That diversity of thought, that diversity of mind makes things better for everybody involved in the educational sphere. And again, we have to find ways of making sure we're keeping and retaining very good, strong teachers. If we're not retaining strong teachers, if we're not keeping strong teachers in the classroom, we're really, really wasting opportunities to make sure that our kids have the best educational experience.
Thank you. So we're going to cycle through two sets of questions, and I'll start with Secretary King. Each of our panelists has mentioned the strength of having a diverse set of models of intellectual authority in classrooms. So historically black colleges and universities comprise about 3% of the nation's colleges and universities, yet we prepare 50% of the nation's African American teachers. And HSIs, Hispanic Serving Institutions, prepare about 90% of the nation's Hispanic Latino teachers. What will your administration do to invest in these colleges and universities as strong engines for the production of minority teachers, or teachers of color, rather?
Yeah, it's a great point. HBCUs and MSIs have a huge role to play in preparing a diverse teacher workforce. One of the best things I think that we can do is to ensure that students have access to those institutions. And so the President's been very committed to issues of access and affordability in higher education, and that has certainly been reflected in our commitment to HBCUs and MSIs. The President also proposes in the 2017 budget a particular investment in teacher and principal preparation, a teacher and principal pathways initiative. There will be a grant program that would give institutions, including HBCUs and MSIs, the opportunity to focus on ensuring that we have a well-prepared, diverse teacher workforce. The President's also proposed a HBCU MSI completion fund, because we know one of our challenges, this is true across the higher education sector, but particularly true for our first generation students, our low income students, many students who start but don't finish. And so we are committed to trying to invest in completion initiatives, which we think will be of particular benefit to HBCUs and MSIs.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Weingarten, you've been very clear that there's some working conditions that are affecting. This is not just a pipeline and preparation issue. This is what's happening in the school building issue. What are the working conditions of schools? So can you talk about the unique working conditions that typically affect teachers of color?
So let me actually start by something that just happened today.
Okay.
And I know I don't mean to derail the question some, but I'm very concerned about the Trump effect. And I think, and I didn't start calling that Petulia Dvorak, in a column today in the Washington Post, has a great column about this. But I think this now starts also being another working condition, teaching condition, learning condition, climate condition for kids. So, for example, when you see, she said, I just got a call from my son's teacher giving me a heads up that two of his classmates decided to point out the immigrants in the class who would be sent home when Trump becomes president. They singled him out and were pointing and laughing at him as one who would have to leave because of the color of his skin in third grade. Now, the reason I start there is because, okay, this is what's happening today. And a school that has a lot of autonomy and authority would actually all get together, and there'd be a lot of work done between the principal and teachers and parents about how to combat this. And that's what I mean about having good working conditions. That's what voice and agency, trust and agency means in terms of the school. And I think there is an opportunity under the new ESSA to actually say, let's actually shift some of that authority, some of that autonomy to schools to be able to start with voice. So voice doesn't cost a lot of money. It actually may cost some time, but it doesn't cost money. And giving people, principals and teachers, that kind of voice is really important. The second piece is, and I think, frankly, Harry, you're the most important person on this panel, with all due respect. But I think that the issue is, how do we actually get to the questions that both the Secretary and Harry raised, which is that you can't have one single person that becomes the diversity go-to guy. Or if there's one guy that's teaching in a whole school, that's the person that gets all the hard kids, so to speak. We have to actually think about, and schools have to think about, not just recruiting, but the supports. What are the supports that are needed? Mentoring is essential. I love the residency programs, but they cost some money. The tools and conditions that teachers say they want and need, not just curriculum material, but the kind of tools to teach project-based, or the autonomy to teach project-based instruction, and actually have the conditions to do that. If you're a civics teacher like me, how can we do some moot processes now to use a situation like this as an opportunity to teach civics? So part of what we're talking about is, how do you actually think about struggling schools in the same exact way as somebody would have thought about my schools in Clarkstown, New York? Give them the same kind of authority and autonomy to actually do the kinds of things that engage kids, and give us the tools and resources to do that. And frankly, if we did that, you'd have a lot of people flocking to, and particularly a lot of teachers of color flocking to these schools, because people want to help other people. And what we're seeing from the research is teachers of color want to help and want to go to struggling schools, but we want to make sure that we actually have a chance to succeed.
Thank you, thank you. So today, this panel is comprised of folks who typically may not be friends, so I'm going to ask this question very gingerly and in a spirit of collegiality, okay? So the NAACP and MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and other civil rights organizations believe that placing uncertified teachers exclusively with the nation's Black, brown, and poor children amounts to a certain sort of educational malpractice. And in fact, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals found that the practice of placing non-certified teachers in classrooms primarily populated by poor Black, brown, and poor children is discriminatory and does harm. So with that in mind, why is Teach for America a good idea?
So I think it's really important that we ground ourselves in the facts. And the fact is that the system that our children attend today does not serve them well. And at Teach for America, the way we define the problem is that it is fully systemic. At the core of it, it's about systemic inequity, it's about racism, it's about lack of expectations. Where I grew up, we do not expect to be teaching and educating the next CEO of our country, of any organization or institution. And it's not about, the way we say it and the way I talk very clearly to people, like, this is, because it's a systemic problem, it requires that we have all hands on deck, and it requires leadership. And we believe that we have to ensure that we are touching the dinner tables of every table in America. We need people from Darien, Connecticut to care about this issue. We need people from McAllen, Texas, where I grew up, to care about this issue, and not just care about it, but to refuse to accept the realities for poor kids and kids growing up in low-income communities, which are mostly African American and Latino children, and say, we're not going to accept that, and we're going to be part of the solution. TFA's been around for 25 years. It is true that the people we recruit, 85% of them had no intention of going into education. I was one of them. But once you start teaching, you fall in love with children, you understand what they're capable of, you see what their potential is boundless, and you know that you can't just go back to life, which is what people say. Our folks, you know, they come, they teach for 2 years, and then they go back to their real lives. Well, in fact, 84% of our 42,000 alums have committed their lives to either working in education or in a low-income community. They're all in once you meet our children and you get to understand the inequities that are grossly unfair. And not only this, like, you get a nuanced understanding of what is going on. And this is an issue of justice. This is not just an issue of, like, let's go teach poor kids. This is an issue of justice. Our children who attend schools, it is about academics, but it's about so much more than academics. They don't have access to health care. They are treated differently because of the color of their skin. They don't have access to dental care. The economic development in their communities is unjust. Like, it is so complex. And my view is that we need folks of all diverse backgrounds. I mean, you said, Harry, like, we need math and science folks who don't see themselves thinking that this is an issue they should care about, understanding this issue. We need folks who intend to go to business and that's where they're headed, or law. And then we need them to go and practice law, taking on the justice system and how it impacts our children in the long term. 30% of our alums end up staying in the classroom, 64% in education. And, you know, and the way I personally think about this question too is we have 500 second-generation core members. What that means is folks who have been taught by core members who join us. And they join us because they see the impact that Teach for America core members and alumni have had on their lives, alongside many others. It is not just about us, but it's about us contributing. I was at Harvard for a recruitment trip this fall, and we got into a conversation, and we always talk about the critiques of Teach for America, so this is not an uncommon question. And afterwards, these two kids came running up to me. They were freshmen, and they were dying to introduce themselves. As it turns out, they grew up in South Texas, where I grew up. They went to IDEA Public Schools, which is a charter school system, which is incredible, founded and started by Teach for America alums. And they said, we're the first two kids from IDEA to go to Harvard. And they wanted me to know that. And as they were describing it, they said, you know, one thing we're so confused about is, like, TFA has critiques. Like, we had no idea. And I said, oh, say more about that. And they just said, we had combined over 20 teachers, core members, alumni, their principals, people they were surrounded by were TFA core members and alumni. And they're like, we didn't know Harvard existed. We didn't know Harvard was ours to dream of and ours to go get. And we are here because of those teachers and their influence. And they said, we want to make a difference when we graduate. We're going to join TFA. Like, that's what we want to do. And I think let's start listening to the kids who are being impacted by the folks around them and what it means to them. And I think that will illuminate why Teach for America is a good and important thing.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Mr. Preston, you talked about being an engineering teacher. Howard University produces the most on-campus PhDs to African Americans in the STEM fields. And about a third of our STEM majors their freshman year are interested in becoming teachers, which I find quite interesting. That's research from our own Dr. Kim Freeman. How has being a Teach for American Fellow advanced your work with teachers unions? You really are a diplomat of sorts to struggle through both of these worlds. And so can you talk about both of those worlds and what you advocate in your daily teaching walk?
Honestly, some people would call it a struggle. I don't find it to be a struggle to walk between the two worlds. And the reason is because they're not two separate worlds. They're two organizations that came together to make sure that children got the best education possible. I mean, that's why we're here, right? We want to make sure that students, no matter where you grow up, no matter what your zip code is, no matter what your income level is, we want to make sure students have the best access to education. Being a TFA alum, I have gained a lot of different viewpoints. I did not go to Harvard or Ivy League school. I went to HBCU. I went to Benedict College. So had friends at the other HU. This is the real one, right?
This is the real one.
But
This is the real one.
but so again, it's a matter of making sure that we're providing access. I mean, I've created a pipeline now for a lot of my students to go into STEM careers and STEM schools that didn't exist before. Let me turn this. That's not me. So that was really lacking for, and I'm not going to say I created the pipeline, right? I'm just going to say that I helped to facilitate those students' entry. Teach for America was one of the things that brought me to Baltimore. I taught in South Carolina, and Teach for America was what brought me to Baltimore. And again, a school that was struggling to find teachers in the areas of STEM. A school district that still has trouble finding people who have backgrounds in math, have backgrounds in physics. My school still doesn't have a physics teacher, even though I'm steadily trying to make that happen. There's a shortage across the board. And the STEM folks will tell you that we represent about 4% of the industry. So the industry's fighting hard to get us too, right? Everybody needs us. And we've got to be the best because we represent we carry the entire race on our shoulders every time we walk through the door. But then you start looking at it, and I've been asked the question several times, why are you still in the classroom if, industry wants you and, Teach for America gave you so many opportunities, you should have left a long time ago. But the same reason I'm part of the Teacher Leaders Union program, our job is to make sure kids are getting those opportunities, so I can't fall short on that job. I cannot. And by being part of these programs, like the Teacher Leaders Union, the Teacher Leaders Program, BTU Teacher Leaders Program, it helps me to get other teachers to see that same need. And as people start to feel that need, as people start to feel that pressure to make sure that legacy continues and that drive continues, yeah, we're going to build more sciences. But we're also going to get more people passionate about making sure other people feel passionate about sciences. So I'm from South Carolina, so I'm going to give a very, very country analogy here. If you want more eggs, you can go out and buy more eggs. But if you really, really want more eggs, you go out and get chickens, because chickens make eggs. So if you want more people in the sciences, you don't just go get more scientists, you go get more people to teach scientists. You get more people to teach teachers. Once you do that, once you start getting people to see that passion is there and the people that look like them and that opportunity is there for them, people that have the same care and concern that come from a similar background, people who have a similar story, an origin story, if you will, then you're going to start to see that spark, that surge, that point of inflection around success levels, around student scores. Because I tell you, I didn't have a single teacher that looked like me until I got to Benedict, and I was very happy that I did, because then they were the ones, that's when my scores started kicking up and I started realizing that this is something I could do. Because I remember being told that I would never go to college and I would have remedial classes, even though I scored a perfect score in my math classes after that teacher told me that. And I didn't get a perfect SAT score, but I got as perfect enough for me. It got me a full ride, and that changed my life. But we shouldn't have to fight. We shouldn't have to have students that have to feel that way. BTU has made it so that AFT BTU has made it so that we have teachers in the classroom that feel that same level of passion. Teach for America has brought teachers from fields that you would not believe would be in the classroom. Those two organizations working together have changed lives of children, have changed lives of families, because if you imagine that the child is doing better, and those parents are feeling better, those cousins and uncles and aunts are feeling better, grandma's doing better, everybody's doing better, and then the children that come after will never even know what that struggle was. That's why we're in it. That's why it's not so difficult to walk the two lines.
Thank you. Secretary King, you say that integration is a school turnaround strategy. Can you talk more about that and why you believe that?
Sure. I think one of the sad truths of our country is that more than 60 years after Brown versus Board of Education, we see places that are going backwards, actually, in terms of issues of school segregation. What we know, and the research evidence is clear, students benefit from going to schools that are diverse. They benefit from going to schools that are racially diverse. Students benefit from going to schools that are socioeconomically diverse. And Dean, you talked earlier about the history around our implementation as a country of Brown versus Board of Education. The reality is, part of the reason we look back on that history as problematic is because we approached all deliberate speed as slow and in some cases never. And so the question for our country is, can we do better? And I think what we see around the country are places where there is genuine enthusiasm, local energy around trying to create socioeconomically diverse schools and preserve socioeconomically diverse schools, from Hartford to Louisville, Kentucky. And we should, we think, invest in those efforts and support those efforts. President's proposed an initiative called Stronger Together in the 2017 budget that would invest $120 million in fostering those kinds of local initiatives. And we know we can create schools that are compelling for all families. If you look at what Hartford, Connecticut's doing, we know that if you have a strong arts program, you can draw students from suburban communities, from urban communities, who all want the benefit of that arts program for their children. We see some great examples of dual language programs around the country where parents want their kids to be bilingual, and a dual language school can equip them with those bilingual skills, but also bring together diverse communities within the school. So we think there's tremendous potential there. It's got to be driven by local leadership and energy, but we think it's important for the country to say that our schools need to reflect the diversity that we value.
Thank you, thank you. There's a quote from you, Ms. Weingarten, saying that the nation needs to imagine a future where students don't fall through the cracks. And so how does a more diverse teaching force contribute to student success and provide a safety net for the nation's students?
So, first off, will you stop calling me Miss Weingarten?
Okay, great. We're friends.
I think the whole notion of pluralism, when it's not talked about in this regard, I should say that before this year of the Trump factor, everybody was all for it. But what is pluralism? What is civitas? What is all of us kind of either getting together, understanding bridges, building bridges, instead of dividing? And so, there's lots of research that says that having a diversified teaching force is important for kids, and I think it was, I forget who said this, it's actually important for white kids as much as it's important for kids of color. But I would actually go farther than the research. Just our common sense compels it. And frankly, since we've done, for the last year, our union has done a bunch of things, including a racial equity task force. In light of Ferguson, we actually started really looking at ourselves and having the conversations that some call courageous and I call well past time. But ultimately, those of us who are white, I would argue, have more of an obligation to focus on this, because we have not focused enough on our own privilege and what our own privilege actually gives us in terms of just simply walking on a street. And so I think that it's really important, if you think about kids, it's really important to make sure that kids have enough diversity and enough security and enough safety valves that they can have these conversations wherever and whenever. And it leads me to the last point I would make, which is, I've always felt strongly about this, but never until the moment that I'm about to describe, which is that several years ago, I decided, even as a school teacher and teacher union leader, that I would actually say publicly that I was gay. I was frightened to death to say it beforehand, because after all, I'm a school teacher and a teacher union leader. And what does that mean? And particularly in light of what happens across the country. And I actually used the occasion of, Gay Pride weekend at my congregation to talk about it publicly for the first time. And I will never forget this. 3 high school kids in New York City. I was the union leader of the UFT at the time. 3 girls came up to me crying. This is 2007. They came up to me crying and said, "Thank you. Thank you for revealing yourself. Thank you for not being invisible. Thank you for saying who you are." because it created hope in us that we don't have to be invisible. Race is not invisible. People have stereotypes all the time. Our obligation to each other, if we are a pluralistic, democratic community, is how to ensure that this does not become a factor. And that's why diversity and diversity of our school staffs are so, so, so important, and why we feel that. So everyone has a story. That's my personal story. But that's why we have to be compelled by the personal stories to actually do something, not just highlight the problem, but as John said, actually do something about it. And so I'm thankful and grateful to have this panel, and you have our commitment as the AFT to not just shine the spotlight on the problem, but to actually use ESSA and the new law to actually do something.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Since we're on a first-name basis, Elisa, many TFA fellows come from a variety of academic disciplines, mostly the social sciences, such as sociology, anthropology. And with this in mind, what are the components of the Teach for America talent development model? Would you focus on the preparation timeline and the content?
Yes, so before I do that, I just want to thank Harry for his comments, and even Randy in the point of building bridges. Like, I just think we're at a point in our trajectory as a country that is deeply divided, a country that's in crisis in so many respects as we look at what's going on in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, I mean really everywhere, where we've got to be working to build bridges, and we are all part of the solution. And I think it is just so unproductive when we are not curious with each other about the work that we are doing. And I mean, TFA is the most studied teacher pipeline in the country, and we do good work. And so I'm very happy to be part of this conversation because, you know, we've learned a lot, and we're actually, you know, we are putting. We have taken action on this topic of diversity that is just so consequential in our nation. And so I just thank you all for saying that. And I think there's a way to be uncompromising about our beliefs, yet build the bridge, because our students need us to act like adults to do what's best for them. And it's going to take collective action for us to actually do what we need for our children. But with that said, what I will say is, in terms of our approach, I mean, it's comprehensive, and, you know, people tend to focus on our training, you know, but our whole model is a whole model, which starts with who we recruit, which we are incredibly aggressive about the standards of the people that we recruit given our model. We study every year our best teachers, what are the skills, the values, the mindsets, the orientations they have, and that's how we accept people into our program. Then we begin the training program, which is, you know, like just a start, and then we put a lot of resources in the ongoing support. We have found that teachers improve the most when they are actually in the classroom and getting feedback, so that you can only study so much and imagine so much, but once you're in front of children, that's when you've got to improve your practice. And so we support our teachers for the 2 years, and then they're part of an ongoing community. We have learned a lot in the last 25 years of the kind of leadership that's required to be, you know, to serve our children in the way that they need to be served. So we focus on things, and I'm gonna narrow in on one thing, but just it's comprehensive, and this is how we think about the whole pipeline that you were talking about, Secretary. And so for us, we know values matters, and for us it is like this is a justice issues, and so how people think about our kids. We know that seeing our children as assets really matters, and being curious about history and context is really important, and grounding yourself in understanding where our children come from and seeing that as a full asset. Our kids do not have deficits. They just need us to help facilitate and bring out their greatness. We know that high, you know, content expertise really matters, and in fact, a third of our teachers have a STEM background that we recruit, and we know that ensuring proficiency on content really matters, and high expectation matters. The other thing is, like, that's really central is we know that culturally relevant approaches matter, and that it is unjust, and we are irresponsible if we are putting teachers in classrooms without taking on identity development. Race is central to what our children face every single single day. And so especially when for us, 49% of our core are people of color, but the rest are white, we have to ensure that we are very responsibly taking on this conversation. It is really hard. We are so far from perfect, and we have so much work to do, but we are unapologetically taking on that conversation. And I do not think enough people that are training teachers are having this conversation. And we all need to be having the conversation no matter what your background is. And so we focus a lot of our efforts on this. We're doing lots of pilots. We still have, more questions than answers on this stuff, but a lot of people are doing really good work. And so we're working really hard to partner with people who have been working on this for many more years than we have. But I personally believe it's so important. And we talk about school to prison pipeline. We want to talk about all these issues. We've got to take this on and deeply understand the role of race and what empowering education really means to our children. And we're very focused on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, please join me in thanking our panelists for coming together today. We really view Howard University as the fertile ground for this conversation. The Brown decision is part of our institutional DNA, and we're delighted that though we have competing agendas, we all have a commitment to diversifying the nation's teaching force and doing better by the nation's school children. So thank you for being here. Word of the day goes to, and I'll ask her to approach, goes to Ms. Kiana Cole. Kiana hails from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. She's an honor student, Secretary King. And Randy, she's president of Student Council, last year's Student Council. We're very proud of her, and she will give us the last word on this.
Great.
Great, thank you.
Did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Proving nature's laws wrong, it learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, but by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from the concrete when no one else even cared. Good afternoon. Howard University is a very special place, and the students already know that. One of the most beautiful pieces of Howard is the School of Education. I just recited a poem by Tupac Shakur entitled, "The Rose That Grew from Concrete." The poem is representative of the reason I am prepared to be the type of teacher I want and need to be. Howard School of Education taught me something very important. All students can learn when given the proper resources, support, encouragement, and love, no matter what their socioeconomic status, race, culture, religion, or various other factors. Howard teaches you not to operate from a deficit model. It pushes us to look at the talents of the students coming in our classrooms. Howard's teacher preparation programs apply the research that compellingly notes that culturally relevant pedagogy, high expectations, strong relationships with students, and meaningful learning are what all students deserve. When preparing his teachers, Howard knows that being a reflective practitioner, engaged researcher, and a leader of change are imperative to the success of students and the longevity of educators. Teachers must reflect as often as they breathe. Reflection provides us the lens we must use to evaluate our performance as educators and to learn from our students, because we do learn from our students. Howard has stressed the importance of this for me. Additionally, teacher candidates are made to understand that engaging in research as teachers of color is vitally necessary. This reality is what I consider another critical aspect of teaching. It has urged me to seek research opportunities and use it to create better outcomes for all students. Also, it means searching for gaps in the literature, because there are gaps in the literature sometimes, and being open to multiple interventions, techniques, and strategies until every student has reached her fullest potential. Lastly, let me briefly address the importance of being a leader of change. The emphasis put on being a change agent in my field has been one of the most treasured memories and learning experiences I've had at Howard University. I now understand that being a teacher is not just about teaching in a little bubble in your classroom. It's about social justice and fighting for children everywhere to have the most equitable, holistic education possible. So like I told you before, Howard is a very special place. And when I become the next Teacher of the Year, or even the United States Secretary of Education, I will look back and credit this amazing institution for the work it's done in my life. Thank you.